Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for MiltonRose Learning with another Let's Learn lesson on the Battle of the Somme 1916 for our World War One series. So obviously we are slap bang in the middle of World War One here, and this is a really grim battle, to put it mildly. It's also a battle that my great-grandfather, I believe, was at and survived. So this one's a personal one. So what we're going to do today then is we'll look at the context and the causes, what was driving this battle to take place in the first instance. Then we'll give you a really good chronology of the Battle of the Somme that you can then pop down into your history books and into your notes. We'll look at a turning point as well, which was a really big turning point for the war technologically. And then we will finish off by looking at the impact and the significance of the Battle of the Somme. Okay, so it really is a blood-soaked kind of lesson today, to be honest. So first off then, context and causes. What was actually pushing forward for this battle to happen? What was kind of leading it to kind of be planned in the first place? Well, the first one is the Verdun crisis. Okay, so basically we had a big problem at a place called Verdun, and we have done a lesson on the Battle of Verdun. So the French army was being bled white by a relentless German assault at Verdun. They could just about hold the German army back, but they were really, really struggling. And you'll kind of see that in the video, I think, for visual learners. French defenders at Verdun holding the German army back desperately. This was tricky, and they were just about holding on. So they needed a diversion. So the Battle of the Somme was launched primarily to force Germany to divert troops away from Verdun to prevent the collapse of the French army. It was absolutely integral, because if the French go down, the war could be lost quite swiftly. Okay, so we needed to take pressure off Verdun. Then the second kind of reason driving this battle was a desire to break the stalemate. So General Haig, who was the British commander, believed in a big push. So he believed a week-long artillery barrage would destroy the German wire in the trenches. If we attack them with enough artillery, we will just decimate them and we'll kill them all basically in their trench. And then we can just advance and away we go. So the big push was kind of there. And also a desire to end attrition. Get rid of this attritional nature of warfare where we just try and grind each other down. So punch a clear gap through the lines, advance and end this war of attrition. That was another reason pushing forward the, behind the planning for the Battle of the Somme. But also politically, Winston Churchill said a very famous quote. I've just got to try and get it right. He said, "The only worse thing than fighting alone is fighting with allies." Because when you've got allies in your alliance in the Triple Entente, you've got to manage all their personalities, and it can get very, very annoying. So there was alliance pressure here, so there was diplomatic expectations. So Britain faced intense pressure from allies, Russia and France, to do something, like help us. We're fighting in Verdun, and the Russians are fighting on the Eastern Front, and we're getting battered. So we need this Battle of the Somme to take pressure away from us. Okay, and you can see the diplomats there really arguing it out in the image. And Triple Entente unity, taking offensive action then, was a political necessity to keep the Allied coalition unified. If Britain decided to go, no, we're just going to sit on our hands and let you do most of the fighting, the Triple Entente could have split apart, and then we would have had real problems then. So Britain felt compelled to launch the Battle of the Somme. Okay, so now we've set the scene for the battle, let's actually have a look at this kind of blood-soaked battlefield. So we've got a really good chronology, which we'll walk you through now and tease some of these points out in more detail, and then we'll look at a really big turning point. Okay, so first off then, you can see these German soldiers in their Stahlhelm helmets. So first off, let's look. 24th of 30th of June 1916, there was a week-long bombardment. So there's a massive barrage. So British artillery fired over 1.5 million shells to destroy the wire and the trenches of Germany. Can you imagine? 1.5 million shells. There was a high failure rate though, because up to 30% of these shells that were flying over towards the German trenches were duds. Okay, they were basically made poorly in the factories. They failed to detonate or even cut the barbed wire. So we've got a problem. So 1.5 million shells was closer to maybe 1 million shells that actually exploded. And because of the duds, but also because of German trench and German engineering, deep underground concrete bunkers kept the German machine gunners alive. Okay, the German trenches were very well constructed, some with concrete, and they survived. So when the artillery stopped, they just come out, get on the machine guns, and start kind of mowing the British soldiers down. Okay, so not good, not a good start at all. Then on the 1st of July 1916, and this is where my great grandfather would have been, the British soldiers go over the top. Okay, here we go. We think the British soldiers, made a fatal assumption. We thought, oh, well, we've bombarded you with 1.5 million shells. I know they haven't all blown up, but it should have done the job. So the British soldiers just actually walked. They weren't told to run. It was just like, we'll walk because there's no one there anyway. They're dead. But they walked into heavy fusillades of fire, and they expected no survivors, but as we know, the Germans were there waiting for us. So that causes catastrophic losses. We suffered 57,470 casualties, almost 20,000 dead on the very first day. Okay, 20,000 dead, more or less, on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. I need that to sink in. And one of them, like I say, was almost my great-grandfather. So we are talking massive, massive casualty figures here. This is almost bordering on ridiculous, how many people are dying here. So it was a single bloodiest day in British military history. Okay, it was absolutely traumatic, I've got to say, the first day of the Battle of the Somme. Okay, however, it's not all bad news in some ways. So the 15th of September 1916, at a place called Flers-Courcelette, apologies for my pronunciation, we have the first use of tanks. Okay, and you can see in the image there, that's a Mark I tank. It must have inspired a lot of fear in the German army. So Britain deploys the Mark I for the first time to breach enemy lines at the Battle of the Somme. So that's a good technological kind of advancement, isn't it? There were some early failures, so mechanical breakdowns were frequent because this was high technology at the time, but its shock value was immense, because imagine you're a German soldier in the trench and you see those monsters coming towards you. You're like, what the hell? Anti-tank weapons were not a thing in this period because tanks, this was the first time a tank was developed, so they didn't really know how to respond. Shock value was extremely high here. This augured in the future of warfare, so it marked the birth of modern mechanized combat doctrines. And remember, doctrine is the rules of how you train your army and how an army fights. So it started to change doctrine here on the back of this. And then number 4, okay, 18th of November 1916. So the weather starts to change, as you can see in the image there. That's quite authentic, I would say. Operations were battered by relentless autumn mud, rain, and freezing cold, which could kill the soldiers as well. I think that it's brought up in poems such as Exposure by Wilfred Owen. Definitely give that a look. The weather was sometimes worse than the enemy. The offensive was halted. General Haig officially calls off the campaign after 141 brutal days of combat. And the tragic balance, I mean, look at it. We gained 6 miles of territory at a cost of over 1 million casualties. Can you believe that? So almost 1 million people, dead or kind of wounded, and just for 6 miles. Okay, so it was basically a strategic failure, and we didn't achieve what we actually wanted to there at all. So it was a big problem. However, as we know, history is all about turning points, and there was one positive turning point for the British. the Battle of Flers-Courcelette, which was like within the Battle of the Somme. It was the historic debut of the Mark I tank. Okay, so it changed warfare forever. So let's just have a little look if we're lucky enough to have a look at it. You can see the Mark I there in action. Bit of a beast. You can see it riding out the trenches. And that was a really big turning point because it brought in the future of warfare. It shifted global military doctrine forever from static trench deadlock towards a more modern mechanized form of combat. Okay, so the rest of the war is not going to be like the first parts of the war. The war and how it's fought will change, and I think that's a big turning point here. So there you go. Okay, now we move on to what was the impact and significance then of the Battle of the Somme. Well, you know how we roll. Tertiary significance are the not that significant. Secondary significant events are those which are kind of in the middle, fairly significant. And then primary significant events are the ones which are really, really important. Okay, it's the historian's job to sift through and work out which ones are tertiary, secondary and primary, and you want to do the same when you're studying history as well. So first off, in terms of tertiary then significance of the Battle of the Somme, let's look at it then. There was big political fallout here and Haig's legacy as well. So home front morale. So there was public horror at these massive casualty lists because these are, this could be your dad on the front line. This could be your brother. This could be your son. So there was public horror at this. It was like, what the hell? We've lost like 1 million casualties here. So it shattered domestic support for the war effort because people in Britain were like, what the hell's going on here? I've lost my dad, I've lost my son, I've lost my brother. So home front morale started to crack. And that caused a political crisis. So it contributed directly to the downfall of Prime Minister Asquith, who was Prime Minister for the first part of the war. He was replaced now by David Lloyd George in December 1916 as a direct consequence of the horrors of the Battle of the Somme. So it brings big political changes, which I would say are fairly significant, but of tertiary significance in my view. Then in terms of secondary significance, it brings forth a revolution in British tactics. We start to fight in a more sophisticated way. So we abandon old doctrines. So massive losses forced British command to abandon outdated cavalry tactics. We were like, forget this, because, fighting on a horse, which is massive. One bullet takes the horse down and then, you're back to infantry. So that doctrine dies after the Battle of the Somme. It's formally just, not a thing anymore. And it brings forth a new military doctrine of combined arms. Okay, you can Google that for me. Combined arms is a new military doctrine, which is basically driving an integration of tanks, creeping barrages from the artillery, aerial reconnaissance from what would be the new RAF, and small unit infantry. So infantry moving in small little pockets and little packets of men, rather than these massive human waves that can just be mowed down by a Vickers or Maxim machine gun. So combined arms starts to kind of form, and we're using all the different arms now of the military as one kind of force all working together, which is a much more sophisticated way of fighting. But then what was the primary significance of the Battle of the Somme? Well, you can debate it, to be honest, and that's part of the beauty of history where you can debate things. But for me, the primary significance was this: the attrition and erosion of the German army. So it wasn't all the casualties on our side. We still did a lot of damage to the Germans. So depleting veteran troops. So we severely eroded Germany's irreplaceable forces in the Battle of the Somme, and it's been called the muddy grave of the German field army. Okay, we did some damage to the German army, and they struggled to replace their men. And you can see just a visual representation here. The Germans just trudging back after the Battle of the Somme. We did do some damage to the German army here, and I don't think that should be downplayed, because ultimately that forced a defensive shift. It shifted German high command permanently onto the defensive now for the remainder of the war. They didn't really do massive attacks after the Battle of the Somme because they were so kind of decimated by the British forces. They only really got their offensive spirit back after 1917, when they knocked the Russians out and they could move their troops from Russia into the Western Front for a massive grand offensive. But at this point, they were on the defensive. There was a withdrawal to the Hindenburg Line in 1917, and they sat back and just wanted to hold what they'd won. So it changed what we call the strategic initiative of the war. And I think that's very, very important. That's of primary significance for me. So there you go. Okay. So hopefully that lesson is kind of very much kind of given over, really, I suppose, to my great grandfather. Like I say, he was at the Battle of the Somme, and if you look back in your own family histories, you may have even had some of your own family who fought at the Somme, because it was such a pivotal battle in the British Army. Hopefully you've enjoyed that, so don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss another Let's Learn video again. If you have any notes or any kind of observations about the Battle of the Somme, please do pop it in the comments, and we'll always do our best to reply as well. And it just remains to say, hopefully you found that as enjoyable as you could, of course. Keep your eyes peeled for the next video in the World War I series as well. And we will hopefully look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.